Quick case study about morning flight in birds, May 2022, Southern Ontario, discussing the types of morning flight that were observed being undertaken by the birds each day. If that doesn't make sense, I've provided 2 links below for where this sort of case study is housed on the internet, as well as a page that discusses the different types of morning flight that I think birds undertake. So this is where the birding occurred. It's on Lake Huron, per the previous photo. I really like the location for studying birds in flight because it's in a really wide open field. So any bird that you see flying by, particularly songbirds, is quite likely undertaking a pointed flight behavior, not just local movements back and forth. And it's sort of extra neat because you can get different types of flight, birds moving in different directions for different reasons, all while watching at the same vantage point. So the orange arrow would be birds that are sort of reorienting or moving south. The red arrow could represent birds that are trying to reorient to the west into Michigan, whereas the green arrow could be diurnal migrants that are just intentionally flying north during the day, or onward migrants that are also sort of moving north or northeast. What makes this case study interesting to me is that the weather was really good for several days in a row for the birds. If a bird wanted to migrate north in Ontario in May, you kind of couldn't ask for better conditions. But also, the morning conditions were suited to this location for me to actually, be out in the field, observing and counting birds. So in a nutshell, what had happened was that on May the 9th, the first huge surge, migration, was sort of behind schedule at that point. So the birds in the morning were almost entirely moving north. For whatever reason, they just felt like they were behind schedule and they needed to continue to make that northward progress. Whereas by May 10th, there's another massive overnight migration, and suddenly a lot of local nesting species, such as indigo bunting or Baltimore oriole, arrived in even larger numbers. But instead of all of the birds going north, a significant number were suddenly going south, which I sort of interpreted as birds reorienting to their breeding territories, either to the south or to the west in Michigan. And then the subsequent days that I was out for, May 11th to 13th, the numbers of birds undertaking each flight sort of slowly declined. As birds reached their breeding territories or birds were no longer behind schedule. We'll discuss the specific species in the next couple of slides, but it really highlighted to me one interesting fact too over these last few days was that as migration got more and more ahead, caught up to what is normal and then got ahead of schedule, there were no huge onward migrations each passing day of later migrant bird species. So I wasn't seeing Cape May warblers or blackpoll warblers flying north each morning. And my theory is that they're not late. Those onward migrations happen with birds that feel like they're behind schedule in spring, and they don't need to continue flying north each morning, and they're also not necessarily reorienting to their breeding territories. They have a lot of migration to go to get up in the northern parts of North America to hit their territories. So the numbers just sort of steadily decreased as the local birds settled into place. So the possible proof is in the bird pudding. Blue jay was the first sort of example I brought up where the largest northbound flight happened on that first day. And generally they're a diurnal migrant, so the vast majority of the birds flying each day were still going north right through the watch period. But there was a detectable increase in the number of birds south. So as they made that big northward progress each day, it seemed entirely reasonable that low numbers were perhaps getting to where they wanted to be and needed to start making south or west sort of reorientations to get to their possible breeding territories. So the key indicator species number 2 for me in figuring out what birds are doing and why they're going the direction they want is yellow-rumped warbler. Peak numbers on that first day during the onward diurnal northbound migration. There was an increase in birds going south on the subsequent days, but there's not a lot of yellow-rumped warblers that nest to the south or to the west of this location, so it kind of makes sense that there weren't huge numbers. And as yellow-rumped warblers caught up by mid-May, you'd expect most of them to have passed through southern Ontario. The numbers just sort of dwindled with each passing day. And sort of the third really interesting species to me over this event was Baltimore oriole. Close to 300 that first day, the vast majority of which are going north because for whatever reason birds still felt like they were behind schedule. They needed to make that northward progress. But by May 10th, during the sort of next mass arrival, was when the local nesting species really started to arrive in huge numbers, and there was a huge flight of birds, mostly going south. And I assume the reorientation element, based on where I was, really concentrated those birds trying to go south or go west to hit their breeding territories. Just I assume doing that like last minute fine-tuning adjustment to get back to where they want to be. And yeah, so the numbers sort of decreased steadily each day after that, because by May 12th, May 13th, there's still a lot of Baltimore Orioles moving in, but eventually they sort of reach that saturation point where all of the local birds have returned and they're where they want to be. I hinted at this already, but as migration got ahead of schedule, I wasn't seeing Wilson's warblers like this bird or blackpoll warblers flying north steadily each day, because by May 12th, May 13th, they don't need to rush up to their breeding territories. They're ahead of schedule. There's no need to undertake an onward migration. There's no need to reorient south or west because they have a lot further north to go. They're not fine-tuning their movements to get to breeding territories locally. So we don't see big southbound flights on those sort of warm, ideal migration conditions in this part of the world. So presumably any birds that came down were just going to be resting and feeding, and staging until the next good migration night lets them go further north. So yeah, sort of a quick overview of these days, these multi-day events, sort of the same location, similar weather conditions, helps me sort of come up with these theories around why these birds are undertaking morning flights, why they're headed the directions that they're headed. Hopefully it's not too self-reinforcing. Hopefully I'm onto something, but as always, let me know if you have any comments or you agree or disagree. Always keen to learn. And yeah, check out those links below. That sort of helps explain what it is I've been talking about.